It's 1 p.m. in Los Angeles on Monday, the 7th of February. It's 4 p.m. in Philadelphia, where I'm about to talk to Terry Cooke, who is the Woodrow Wilson, who is at the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he's been a 2010 public policy scholar. I'm Marc Strassman, reporter with eTopia News. We're going to talk about renewable energy in China and the U.S. Welcome, Terry, back to eTopia News.
Thank you, Mark. It's nice to be back.
Um, the occasion of this our conversation is with the visit of Jintao to Washington. What was the significance of that visit, and how has that affected U.S. China relations, especially relating to renewable energy?
Well, the Chinese have an expression, 一为生, 二为熟, or 二为熟, and that means that familiarity is built through frequent meetings. And President Hu and President Obama have now met for the third time, and it has been necessary to put the U.S.-China relationship on a firm footing that the leaders get to know one another personally. And the Chinese have long hoped for a state visit, which comes with certain trappings, a color guard, a 21-gun salute, and a fancy dinner at the White House. And I think the purpose of the visit was to improve the understanding between the leaders so we can get on with solving some of the problems that our countries face.
So all of that pomp and circumstance actually had a real geopolitical purpose.
It does, because the Chinese in particular care a great deal about pomp and circumstance as far as the reception given their leaders is concerned. And I think the United States, more than the average country out there on the global scene, it matters to the Chinese what type of reception the Chinese are accorded by the White House. And there is definitely no shortage of pressing problems that the two countries need to solve. It can be furthered by their leaders communicating and getting to know one another better.
So this shows that the Obama administration knows what it's doing, at least to the extent that it's giving the Chinese something that they want that really doesn't cost the U.S. anything.
I think that's true. There's some mutual education that needs to go on in both societies. And it's not always easy holding an event like this because there are certain groups, but both back in China and here domestically in the U.S., that jump on an event like that and question whether it should be happening. I believe that it does contribute directly to solving real problems that is in both the U.S. interest, the Chinese interest, and the global interest.
So it's a win-win.
Yes.
Okay, now what's happening now in terms of renewable energy is in the context of the recent meeting in Cancun. What was the purpose of that meeting, and how did U.S.-China relations there differ from the way they did in Copenhagen a year earlier?
Well, the UN process for climate change is something that has a lot of acronyms. There is a lot of pomp and circumstance and formality, and there's a lot of complexity just given the number of nations involved. It's easy for it to be a my eyes glaze over topic. But let me put one thing on the table that explains why it's important. In November 2009, after the previous round of the UN process failed in Copenhagen, the basis for cap and trade legislation in the United States collapsed. It was collateral fallout of the collapse of the global process. And so there is a direct payout to what is happening nationally from this complex, quite political process at the UN. And fortunately, this most recent round in Cancun, it went to about the 11th hour and the 59th minute before it became clear that it was going to succeed and not collapse in acrimony. But this time there was some clear measure of success. Nobody got everything they wanted, but at least it created a sense of forward momentum that then can be translated at the national level while we're waiting for the next round of the global process.
Briefly, what was substantively agreed to, and who compromised on what, and how did that make for a better agreement?
Well, at the simplest level, the breakdown in 2009 in Copenhagen had to do with the fact that the U.S. and China did not reach an agreement. China's position was that the developed nations led by the U.S. needed to figure out how they were going to be financing carbon mitigation efforts by the developing world, and China positioned itself as the spokesperson for the developing world. The U.S. position was that until there were some clear agreements about how carbon mitigation efforts were to be measured, reported upon, and verified, that they were not willing to undertake commitments about financing the effort. Much the same problem or difference in positions was at the fore in Cancun a few months ago, but this time there was more of an effort and more of a willingness on China and the United States side to compromise. And so the U.S. did not get everything that it wanted with measurement, reporting, and verification. China did not get everything it wanted in terms of how the developed world would finance this, but they both got a part of what they wanted, and the process is now moving forward.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about the bilateral relations between the U.S. and China in terms of energy policy as it now stands. What would you say the tone of the relationship is right now?
The Chinese have an expression which does capture the moment. It's one bed, different dreams. I think both President Obama and President Hu were intent during the state visit that took place January 18th to 21st in projecting a cooperative vision for the future. However, the nature of the cooperative vision that each one was intent on projecting differed quite substantially. The U.S. was taking a firm approach that cooperation in the future needs to be built on some hard-headed progress now on issues that have tended to be irritants in the relationship. China had a vision that really was more diffuse and did not deal with the immediate issues with quite the same degree of detail and clarity. The intermediate steps that we would be taking to get to this cooperative future.
Now, one of the issues that seems to be coming up a lot, I just was reading about it a little bit this morning, is the migration of U.S. renewable energy manufacturing to China, because the economic environment there is more conducive for American companies to do their manufacturing in China than in Massachusetts, for example. What, if anything, has been the impact of these discussions on that dynamic?
Well, it definitely has a major impact in terms of the kind of politics of the situation, and particularly in the United States. I'm not sure that the newspaper headline characterization of the issue, though, is exactly what you just is the most accurate description of what's happening. What is clear is that China is a market where there is a vast need for clean energy and clean tech applications. It's probably the most polluted major market on the planet. They need the technologies. In addition to that, there's a governmental system that does have a plan, and it's able to implement that plan at a faster speed and, given the size of a market, at a greater scale than is possible in the United States or Europe or almost anywhere else. That does not mean in all cases that there's abandonment of the North American market in favor of the Chinese market. What it does mean is that there's an opportunity for innovators in the US market and in Europe to scale up their innovation quickly, to get it deployed at large scale, and to build a better global presence for their company. And I think in many cases, that's the key dynamic to focus on. The intellectual property protection is not always in China what people are used to in the US and in Western Europe. And I think the owners of intellectual property in the clean tech space are careful on that issue.
Okay. What some of this involves is something called economic statecraft. What would you say that means, and what's the implication of that for what we've been talking about?
Well, in a nutshell, the traditional ability to influence the world by a nation state over the last 6 decades flowed from the new world situation after World War II. And the power of a country, whether it be the United States or the old Soviet Union, and their ability to influence other nation states largely had to do with the size of their standing army and with their bases around the world. What has happened over the past 10 years or so is a growing appreciation that China is representing a somewhat new model. They're not building up and gaining global influence through stationing troops around the world. They are building up global influence by doing large-scale infrastructure projects around the world and by using the strength of their export manufacturing capability to gain influence in markets around the world. They've been doing that according to a fairly clear plan. It's described in their 5-year planning documents. But the United States has, partly because of entanglements around the world, the United States has only gradually come to recognize how important a new basis of power this economic statecraft is, as opposed to the more traditional hard power of military and Defense Department assets.